The rain hammered down on Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport with the kind of intensity that made even seasoned travelers reconsider their plans. General Marcus Thornton stood under the terminal awning, his three-star insignia barely visible beneath his civilian jacket, watching taxis crawl through the downpour like confused beetles. He was tired, bone tired, the kind of exhaustion that came from 18 hours of congressional testimony, defending budget allocations for Joint Special Operations Command while politicians who had never heard a shot fired in anger questioned every line item. His driver had called in sick, his aide was stranded at the Pentagon due to the flooding, and every rideshare app on his phone showed wait times of over an hour. A yellow cab pulled up, its windshield wipers working overtime. The driver's side window rolled down just enough for a voice to emerge. "Need a ride, friend?" The voice was calm, measured, with an accent that spoke of the American South but had been worn smooth by time and distance. General Thornton hesitated. He usually avoided traditional taxis, preferring the security and predictability of official transportation or vetted services. But standing in the rain was losing its appeal rapidly. "Pentagon," he said, climbing into the back seat and shaking water from his jacket. "Yes, sir," the driver replied, pulling smoothly into traffic. Thornton settled back, finally getting a good look at the driver in the rearview mirror. The man appeared to be in his late 50s, maybe early 60s. Salt and pepper hair cut military short, clean-shaven. His posture was ramrod straight despite hours behind the wheel. But it was the eyes that caught Thornton's attention. They moved constantly, checking mirrors, scanning intersections, reading traffic patterns 3 cars ahead. Those weren't civilian eyes. Those were the eyes of someone trained to see threats before they materialized. "Military?" Thornton asked, more statement than question. The driver's eyes flicked to the mirror, meeting his briefly. "Long time ago, friend. Different world back then." "Army?" "Something like that." The driver's tone was polite but clearly indicated the subject was closed. They drove in silence for a few minutes. The rain was causing havoc with traffic. What should have been a 20-minute drive was looking more like 45. Thornton found himself studying the driver more carefully. The way his hands rested on the wheel, positioned for instant reaction. The slight cant of his head that suggested he was listening to multiple conversations on the radio while simultaneously monitoring their surroundings. The deliberate path he was taking through side streets, avoiding choke points and areas with limited egress routes. This wasn't just a former soldier, this was someone with serious training. "You know," Thornton said conversationally, "I spend a lot of time with military folks. I can usually spot which branch, sometimes even which unit, by how they carry themselves." "That so?" The driver's tone remained neutral. "You're not regular Army. Marines maybe, but I don't think so. Rangers have a particular swagger. Delta guys think they're invisible. SEALs can't help but let you know they're SEALs even when they're trying to be quiet about it." The driver chuckled, a dry sound. "You've got the special operations community pegged pretty well." 28 years in uniform will do that," Thornton replied, "which leaves some interesting possibilities. You drive like someone expecting an ambush. You chose a route that prioritizes multiple escape options over speed. And unless I'm mistaken, that's not just a healthy paranoia. That's training that's been reinforced through actual experience. You always interrogate your taxi drivers, friend?" "Only the interesting ones." Thornton leaned forward slightly. "So here's my question. If I had to guess, and I'm pretty good at guessing, I'd say you were Tier 1, top of the food chain. The kind of operator who doesn't officially exist in any database. Am I warm?" The driver was silent for a moment, navigating around a stalled delivery truck. "You're asking questions that might have answers you're not cleared for, General." Thornton smiled. So the driver had made him as a flag officer despite the civilian clothes and lack of visible rank. That confirmed his suspicion. This was no ordinary cabbie. "Fair enough," Thornton said. "How about this instead? Just for fun, hypothetically, if you had been in the teams, what would your call sign have been?" It was meant as a light question, a way to keep the conversation going during a long ride. Thornton expected a deflection, maybe a joke about Hollywood call signs versus real ones, or perhaps a polite change of subject. He did not expect the temperature in the cab to drop 10 degrees. The driver's eyes found his in the rearview mirror again, but this time they weren't politely deflecting. They were assessing, calculating, deciding something. When he spoke, his voice was quieter, but somehow carried more weight than before. Reaper 6. The name hit Thornton like a physical blow. His hand instinctively moved to grip the door handle. Reaper 6 wasn't just a call sign, it was a legend, a ghost story told in classified briefings. The name whispered about in Pentagon corridors when someone needed to explain an impossible mission that had somehow succeeded. Reaper 6 had been the commander of Task Force 121's most classified unit, the man who had hunted high-value targets across 3 continents, the operator who had supposedly died in a black helicopter crash in Yemen in 2012, taking a dozen other Tier 1 operators with him in what was officially described as a training accident. Except the general sitting in the back of this taxi had been a colonel back then, serving on the Joint Staff. He had been read into the real report. There had been no training accident. Task Force 121 had been betrayed, ambushed by assets they thought were Allied forces. The casualties had been real, but the operation details were sealed at a level that made even congressional oversight committees back away. And Reaper 6, the task force commander, had been listed as KIA. Body recovered, buried with full honors at Arlington. Thornton had attended the closed casket funeral. "That's not possible," Thornton said slowly. "Reaper 6 died 12 years ago." "Did he?" The driver's tone was conversational, but something dangerous lurked beneath it. Or did someone need the world to think he died so he could hunt the people who set up that ambush without them knowing he was coming? Thornton's mind raced through the implications. If this man was really who he claimed to be, then the attack in Yemen hadn't been the end of the story. It had been the beginning of something else entirely. Something so classified that even a 3-star general with JSOC oversight didn't know about it. "I saw the casualty reports," Thornton said carefully. "I saw the photos. You saw what you were supposed to see." The driver took an exit that would lead them through a quieter section of Arlington. "Tell me, General, what do you know about Operation Clean Sweep?" "Never heard of it." "You wouldn't have. It didn't officially exist. Still doesn't." The driver pulled into an empty parking lot overlooking the Potomac, put the car in park, and turned to face Thornton directly for the first time. The man's face was weathered, scarred in places that suggested violent encounters survived through skill and luck. But it was the absolute certainty in his eyes that convinced Thornton. This wasn't some conspiracy theorist or mentally unstable veteran. This was a man stating facts. 12 years ago, the driver began, Task Force 121 was the sharpest weapon in America's arsenal. We didn't just hunt terrorists, we eliminated networks, entire organizations, sometimes before they even knew we were coming. We were that good. Thornton remained silent, letting him continue. But someone was always one step ahead of us. Targets would disappear hours before we hit. Safe houses would be empty. High-value individuals would change their routines at the last possible second. At first, we thought it was operational security failures. Maybe our interpreters were compromised. Maybe local forces were tipping people off. The driver's jaw tightened. Then we started losing people. Not in combat, in accidents, training incidents. A helicopter goes down. A vehicle hits an IED on a supposedly secure route. A sniper round from an impossible distance. Each time, the investigation would conclude it was just bad luck, the fog of war. "But you didn't believe that," Thornton said. "I commanded those men, General. I knew their capabilities, I knew their training, and I knew the odds of that many accidents happening to Tier 1 operators in a 6-month period were astronomical." The driver's hands clenched briefly, then relaxed with obvious effort. So I started digging, quietly, outside official channels, and what I found scared me more than any enemy I'd ever faced. "What did you find?" The driver reached into his jacket pocket, and Thornton's hand instinctively moved toward where his sidearm would normally be. But the driver simply pulled out a worn photograph, handing it back to Thornton. The photo showed 5 men in civilian clothes standing in what looked like a high-end restaurant. Thornton recognized 2 of them immediately. One was currently a 4-star general commanding CENTCOM. Another was a deputy director at the CIA. The other 3 faces were familiar, but he couldn't immediately place them. "That photo was taken in Dubai, 3 weeks before the Yemen ambush," the driver explained. "The gentleman on the left is Dmitry Volkov, head of the Wagner Group. The one in the middle is Hassan al-Masri, who supposedly died in a drone strike but actually runs the largest arms trafficking network in the Middle East. And the one on the right is James Morrison, CEO of Titan Defense Solutions. Thornton felt his stomach sink. Titan Defense Solutions was one of the largest private military contractors in the world, with billions in government contracts. If Morrison was meeting with Russian mercenaries and international arms dealers, the implications were staggering. I took that photo, the driver continued. I'd been tracking Morrison for 2 months, trying to figure out how our operations kept getting compromised. What I found was a network that made standard corruption look like petty theft. They weren't just selling intelligence, they were orchestrating entire operations, creating conflicts that required private military solutions, eliminating competition, both foreign and domestic. That's a serious accusation, Thornton said carefully. It's not an accusation, General, it's a confession. Because I didn't just find evidence, I confronted Morrison directly, told him I knew what he was doing, that I was going to expose everything. The driver's voice dropped. That's when I realized how deep the corruption went. Morrison laughed at me, said I could expose him all I wanted because the people who'd be investigating him were already on his payroll. So the Yemen operation was a setup from the start, the driver finished. Morrison used his contacts in CENTCOM to feed us intelligence about a high-value target in Yemen. Made it look time-sensitive, urgent, the kind of mission we couldn't pass up. We flew in thinking we were hitting a terrorist cell. Instead, we landed in a kill zone. The driver's hands tightened on the steering wheel, knuckles going white. 14 men died in the first 30 seconds. Good men. Brothers. The only reason I survived was because I'd been trained to expect betrayal. My first sergeant always said, trust your team but verify your intelligence. So I positioned myself with an egress route, just in case. You escaped the ambush, Thornton said. Barely. Took shrapnel in 3 places. Bullet through my shoulder. I crawled 2 miles through the desert before I found a Bedouin family who hid me. By the time I made it back to friendly forces, I was officially dead. They'd recovered bodies, or what they thought were bodies, from the crash site. DNA evidence, dental records, the whole 9 yards. Falsified, Thornton realized. Easy to do when the people running the investigation are the ones who set up the ambush in the first place. The driver turned back to face forward, staring out at the rain-swept river. I spent 3 months recovering in an off-the-books clinic in Jordan, courtesy of some contacts who didn't ask questions. While I was there, I had a lot of time to think. I could come back from the dead, expose the conspiracy, and probably get killed for real. Or I could stay dead and use that freedom to hunt down everyone responsible. You chose to hunt, Thornton said. Wouldn't you have? The driver met his eyes in the mirror again. They killed my men, General, 14 of the best operators America ever produced. They killed them for money, for contracts, for political positioning. That doesn't get forgiven. That gets answered. The rain continued to drum on the roof of the cab. Thornton was trying to process everything he'd heard. If even half of it was true, it represented corruption at a level that would shake the defense establishment to its foundations. So what did you do? Thornton asked. The driver smiled, but there was no humor in it. I became what they feared most, a ghost with a grudge and nothing left to lose. I spent 3 years tracking down everyone involved in that ambush. Morrison's network reached further than I'd imagined. Defense contractors, intelligence officials, military officers, politicians. They'd created a shadow government within the government, siphoning billions from defense budgets while making sure any investigation would be blocked by their allies. And you killed them? Thornton asked, though he already knew the answer. I did what was necessary. Morrison died in a car accident in Monaco. Very tragic. His deputy, who'd helped plan the Yemen operation, had a heart attack in his sleep. Natural causes. The CENTCOM general who'd signed off on the operation retired early after some unfortunate photographs appeared online. Not illegal, just embarrassing enough to end his career. The driver's voice was matter-of-fact, describing what amounted to a systematic elimination campaign against powerful men. Each death was different, each appeared unconnected to the others, but they all knew. The ones who survived knew that someone was coming for them. They just didn't know who or when. You're describing assassination, Thornton said. Murder. I'm describing justice, General, the kind that can't happen through official channels when the people you're trying to prosecute control those channels. The driver started the cab, again pulling back onto the road toward the Pentagon. Tell me, what would you have done? 14 men dead, evidence of treason at the highest levels. But every official investigation blocked or redirected. Every attempt to expose the truth shut down by people with classified stamp and security clearances. Thornton didn't have an easy answer to that. He'd spent his career believing in the system, in the chain of command, in the rule of law. But he also knew that sometimes the system failed. Sometimes the law was too slow or too compromised to deliver justice. How many, Thornton asked quietly, how many did I eliminate? 47 over 8 years. Each one directly involved in the Yemen ambush or the cover-up that followed. Each one carefully researched, evidence compiled, proof of guilt verified independently. I didn't kill suspects, General. I killed traitors with American blood on their hands. The number was staggering, 47 high-level officials and contractors, all dying under circumstances that appeared natural or accidental over an 8-year period. The coordination alone would have required resources, intelligence networks, and skills that even most special operations forces didn't possess. And now, Thornton asked, are you still hunting? Now I drive a cab, the driver said simply. The main players are gone. The network is shattered. What's left are small-time operators who don't pose a strategic threat. I eliminated the disease, not every symptom. They were approaching the Pentagon now, the massive building looming through the rain. Thornton was trying to decide what to do with the information he'd just received. He was a 3-star general with oversight responsibilities. By rights, he should be reporting this conversation, launching an investigation, bringing this man in for questioning. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the absolute certainty in the driver's voice. Maybe it was the knowledge that even after 12 years, there were still classified aspects of the Yemen incident that troubled him. Or maybe it was the simple fact that if this man had wanted to disappear, truly disappear, he wouldn't be driving a cab in D.C. He was here for a reason. Why tell me this? Thornton asked. Why reveal yourself now? The driver pulled up to the Pentagon's taxi drop-off area, putting the car in park. Because the network I destroyed wasn't the only one, General. It was just the one that affected my men. There are other conspiracies, other betrayals happening right now. Operations failing because of compromised intelligence. Soldiers dying because someone is profiting from their deaths. He turned to face Thornton again. You're being considered for the Joint Chiefs, Vice Chairman, maybe even Chairman in a few years. You'll have access to intelligence and operations across all services. You'll be in a position to see patterns that others miss, to ask questions that need asking. And you want me to do what exactly? Thornton asked. I want you to look, really look, at the operations that fail for no good reason, at the contractors who always seem to benefit from military setbacks, at the officials who retire early with consulting contracts worth millions. And when you find something that doesn't add up, something that suggests another network like Morrison's, the driver reached into his jacket again, this time pulling out a plain business card with nothing but a phone number printed on it. He handed it back to Thornton. You call that number, leave a message with the word Reaper and whatever details you can safely share. Within 48 hours, I'll contact you. Thornton took the card, studying the number. It was a DC area code, but otherwise gave no indication of who would answer. And then what? Then I do what I do best, General. I hunt, I find the truth, and I make sure the people responsible face consequences one way or another. That's vigilante justice, Thornton said. That's operating outside the law. Yes, it is, the driver agreed. But sometimes the law is too compromised to function. Sometimes the only way to restore justice is to become the monster the monsters fear. I've made my peace with that. Thornton sat in silence for a moment, the card heavy in his hand. Everything in his training, his career, his beliefs about duty and honor said he should refuse this offer. Should arrest this man, report him, let the system handle it. But a small voice in the back of his mind, the voice that had kept him alive through 2 decades of combat operations, was whispering something different. It was reminding him of the operations he'd seen fail for inexplicable reasons, the intelligence that had been just wrong enough to cause casualties without being obviously sabotaged. The contractors who always seemed to be in the right place at the right time to secure new contracts. I haven't agreed to anything, Thornton said carefully, pocketing the card. I know, the driver replied, but you will. Because you're like me, General. You care more about your soldiers than your career. When you find the next conspiracy, and you will find it because they never learn, you'll make the right choice." Thornton opened the door, stepping out into the rain. He pulled out his wallet to pay for the ride, but the driver waved him off. "First ride's free," the driver said. "Consider it a professional courtesy, one operator to another." "I was never an operator," Thornton protested. "I'm just a staff officer who got promoted too often." The driver smiled, and for the first time it reached his eyes. "You served 28 years, General. You've deployed to every sandbox and jungle where America asked you to go. You've made decisions that cost lives and saved them. In my book, that makes you an operator. The uniform and rank are just details." Thornton found himself nodding, accepting the strange compliment. "If I do call that number, if I do find something that needs your particular skills, how do I know you'll answer?" "Because I gave you my word," the driver said simply. "And because I'm not done yet. The men who died in Yemen deserve justice. The men dying now because of current corruption deserve protection. And somebody needs to be the one willing to cross lines that good men like you can't cross." "Crossing those lines makes you what exactly?" Thornton asked. The driver considered the question for a moment. "It makes me a necessary evil, General. Every society has them. The people who do the dark work so others can sleep peacefully. I used to do it under orders, with legal authorization and official sanction. Now I do it because it still needs doing and nobody else will." Thornton closed the cab door, watching as the yellow taxi pulled away into traffic. He stood in the rain for a long moment, the card burning like a coal in his pocket. Then he walked into the Pentagon, going through security, making his way to his office on the 4th floor. His aide, Captain Jennifer Morrison, no relation to the defense contractor, was waiting with a stack of briefing books and a concerned expression. "General, I'm so sorry about earlier. The flooding caught everyone off guard. Did you get back okay?" "Fine," Thornton replied absently. "Just a cab ride." But as he settled into his office, reviewing the daily intelligence summaries, he couldn't stop thinking about the conversation. About Reaper 6, supposedly dead for 12 years, driving a taxi through D.C. like a ghost haunting the halls of power. About conspiracies and corruption running through the defense establishment like cancer. About the choice he'd been offered, to call that number or to pretend the conversation had never happened. His computer chimed with a new classified message. It was from CENTCOM reporting a special forces operation in Syria that had gone wrong. 4 dead, 2 wounded, target escaped. Initial assessment suggested compromised intelligence, possibly from local assets. Thornton read through the report carefully. The operation had been planned with care, executed by experienced operators. The target was a high-value individual with links to both ISIS remnants and international arms dealers. The intelligence had come from a contractor with deep ties to Syrian opposition groups. On the surface, it looked like the kind of setback that happened in complex operational environments. Fog of war. Bad luck. The kind of report that would be filed, reviewed, and eventually forgotten as just another cost of doing business in the Middle East. But Thornton found himself reading it again, this time with different eyes, looking for patterns, noting the contractor's name, Titan Defense Solutions, seeing how the target had supposedly escaped just minutes before the raid, almost as if he'd been warned. Observing that the casualties had all been from the same ODA team, men with specific skills in counterproliferation operations, it was probably nothing. Correlation wasn't causation, but the driver's words echoed in his mind. Operations failing for no good reason. Contractors who always seemed to benefit from military setbacks. Thornton opened his desk drawer, looking at the card he'd placed there. Just a phone number. No name, no organization. But it represented something more than just a way to contact a vigilante. It represented a choice between the system he'd served his entire career and the hard truth that sometimes the system failed. He didn't call the number, not yet, but he didn't throw the card away either. Instead, he pulled up the classified database and started searching for other recent operations that had ended badly. Syria, Afghanistan, Yemen, Iraq, Somalia. He cross-referenced them with contractor involvement, looking for patterns. What he found disturbed him. Over the past 18 months, there had been 23 special operations missions that had failed in similar ways. Compromised intelligence. targets that escaped just before raids, casualties that seemed disproportionate to the threat level. And in each case, the same handful of contractors were involved in some capacity. Titan Defense Solutions appeared in 17 of the 23 reports. Titan had supposedly been dismantled after Morrison's death, but clearly someone had rebuilt it under new management. Or perhaps it had never really died, just changed names and paperwork while continuing the same corrupt practices. Thornton leaned back in his chair, staring at the data on his screen. This was more than coincidence. This was pattern. This was systematic. This was exactly what Reaper 6 had described, a network using American military operations as profit centers, willing to sacrifice soldiers' lives for contracts and influence. He should report this, should take it to the Inspector General, to the FBI, to congressional oversight. Follow proper channels, trust the system. But what if the driver was right? What if the system was compromised at levels that would block any official investigation? What if reporting this just tipped off the conspirators and got more soldiers killed? Captain Morrison knocked on his door, entering with coffee and a concerned expression. "Sir, you've been staring at that screen for 2 hours. Everything okay?" Thornton minimized the database. "Fine, Jenny, just thinking about the Syria report." "Terrible situation," she agreed. "But these things happen in special operations. High risk, high reward. Sometimes the dice don't roll our way." It was the standard response, the one Thornton had given himself dozens of times over his career. But now it rang hollow. How many times had they accepted casualties as the cost of doing business when they should have been asking harder questions? "Jenny, do me a favor," Thornton said. "Pull all after-action reports from special operations missions in the past 2 years. I want to do a comprehensive review of our success rates, casualty patterns, and intelligence reliability." She looked surprised. "Sir, that's going to be thousands of pages of classified material. What specifically are you looking for?" "I'll know it when I see it," Thornton replied. "Start with operations involving private contractors in intelligence gathering or logistical support roles." As Morrison left to compile the reports, Thornton turned back to his screen. He opened a secure email and composed a message to an old friend, Colonel Sarah Chen, who served as the J2 Intelligence Director for Special Operations Command. The email was carefully worded, asking general questions about intelligence reliability and contractor vetting procedures. Nothing that would raise red flags, but enough to get Sarah thinking along the same lines he was. If there was a pattern, she'd see it too. She was one of the best intelligence analysts in the military, with a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions. His secure phone rang. The caller ID showed it was General William Bradford, the 4-star commanding SOCOM. Thornton answered immediately. "Marcus," Bradford's voice was warm but tired. "Heard you had a rough day with Congress. Those vultures give you too much trouble?" "Nothing I couldn't handle, sir," Thornton replied. "Just the usual questions about why we spend so much money on operations we can't talk about." "The burden of secrecy," Bradford agreed. "Listen, I'm calling about something else. We've got a situation developing in Yemen. High-value target, time-sensitive intelligence. I'm putting together a joint task force to handle it, and I want you as deputy commander." Yemen. The word sent a chill down Thornton's spine. "What's the intelligence source, sir?" "Contractor with local assets. Titan Defense Solutions, actually. They've been very reliable lately. Several successful operations based on their intelligence." Thornton felt his stomach drop. "Sir, I'd like to review the intelligence package personally before we commit forces. Maybe have our own analysts verify it independently." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's SOP, Marcus. Of course we'll verify it, but I need to know you're on board. This could be a significant win, taking out a major node in the arms trafficking network." "I'm on board, sir," Thornton said, knowing he couldn't refuse without raising suspicions. "Just want to make sure we're not walking into another Syria situation." "Understood. I'll have the package sent to your skiff within the hour. We brief the SecDef tomorrow morning at 0800. The call ended, leaving Thornton staring at his phone. Yemen. Titan Defense Solutions. A high-value target that needed immediate action. It was the same pattern that had gotten Task Force 121 killed 12 years ago. He pulled out the card from his drawer, studying the phone number. He told himself he wouldn't call unless he was absolutely certain there was a threat. But what if waiting until he was certain meant more dead? Operators? What if the time to act was now, before another ambush could be sprung? Thornton picked up his secure cell phone, the one with encryption that made even NSA intercepts useless. He dialed the number on the card. It rang 3 times before a mechanical voice answered. "Leave a message after the tone." Thornton took a deep breath. Once he did this, there was no going back. He'd be crossing a line, involving himself with someone who operated outside the law, who'd admitted to dozens of assassinations. Everything he'd been taught said this was wrong, but everything he'd learned in 28 years of service said that protecting his soldiers came first. "Reaper," Thornton said quietly. "Yemen operation. Titan Defense Solutions providing intelligence. Briefing tomorrow morning. Same pattern as Syria. Need verification before we commit forces. Call me on this number." He ended the call and sat back, heart pounding. He'd just asked a ghost for help, a dead man who drove a taxi and hunted traitors. It was insane. It was also the right call. He knew it in his gut. His computer chimed with the intelligence package from SOCOM. Thornton opened it, reading through the details. The target was Ibrahim al-Sayed, a Yemeni national with connections to Iranian intelligence and multiple terrorist organizations. The intelligence suggested he was planning a major attack on U.S. interests in the region, possibly involving chemical weapons. The source was listed as HUMINT asset, verified reliable, contractor managed. In other words, someone working for Titan Defense Solutions who had provided good intelligence in the past. But as Thornton read deeper, he noticed details that troubled him. The intelligence was almost too specific. Exact GPS coordinates for al-Sayed's location, precise timing for when he'd be vulnerable, limited security presence. It was the kind of actionable intelligence that special operations planners dreamed about. It was also the kind of intelligence that could be fabricated to lure forces into an ambush. Thornton spent the next 2 hours going through the package with a fine-tooth comb. He cross-referenced the asset's previous intelligence with known ground truth, checked the pattern of life analysis against satellite imagery, looked for inconsistencies or indicators of deception. What he found was troubling. The asset had provided intelligence on 17 operations over the past year. 12 had been successful, but 5 had failed in ways that suggested the intelligence had been deliberately compromised. And those 5 failures had all resulted in casualties, 23 dead operators total. His secure cell rang. Unknown number, but Thornton knew who it was. "This is Thornton. Received your message." It was the same voice from the cab, calm and measured. "I'm familiar with the Yemen operation. You're right to be suspicious." "You know about it already?" Thornton asked. "I make it my business to know about operations involving Titan Defense Solutions General. They're the rebuilt version of Morrison's network. Same playbook, new players." "The Yemen intelligence is a setup. How can you be certain?" "Because Ibrahim al-Sayed died 3 months ago in a drone strike," the voice replied. "CIA operation, kept quiet to maintain the fiction that he was still alive. Titan doesn't know he's dead because they're using old contact information and getting played by someone claiming to be al-Sayed." Thornton felt his blood run cold. "So if we send forces in, they'll be walking into an ambush set by whoever is impersonating al-Sayed. My guess would be Iranian Quds Force or possibly one of the Yemeni militant groups. Either way, your operators will be outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from support." "I need proof," Thornton said, "something I can take to General Bradford to stop this operation." "Check with CIA's Counter-Proliferation Division. Ask about Operation Sandstorm. That was the designation for the al-Sayed strike. They'll confirm he's dead, though you'll need to push hard because they're trying to keep it compartmented." "Why would Titan fall for intelligence about a dead target?" Thornton asked. "Because they're either incompetent, which I doubt, or they're in on it," the voice replied. "My money is on the latter. Someone at Titan is deliberately feeding bad intelligence to set up another ambush. The question is why?" Thornton thought about it. Contractor performance metrics. If special operations missions fail, it creates demand for private military solutions. More contracts, more money, more power. "Now you're thinking like they do, General. But there's more to it than that. Each failed operation also eliminates experienced operators, the ones who might notice patterns, who might ask uncomfortable questions. It's a 2-for-1 special, profits and plausible deniability." "I need to brief General Bradford," Thornton said. "Stop this operation before it launches." "Be careful how you do that," the voice cautioned. "If Titan has assets inside SOCOM, and they almost certainly do, pushing too hard could tip them off. They'll just delay this operation and launch another one that you won't see coming. So what do you suggest? There was a pause. Let the operation proceed, but change the parameters. Send a smaller force, use different insertion methods, have contingency plans for heavy contact. Make it look like you're following the original plan while actually preparing for an ambush. When the trap springs, your forces will be ready. That's still putting my people at risk, Thornton objected. Less risk than canceling the operation and waiting for the next ambush, the voice countered. This way, you control the variables. You know it's a trap, so you can prepare accordingly. And when the shooting starts, you'll have proof that Titan's intelligence was deliberately compromised. It was a calculated risk, using soldiers as bait to expose a conspiracy. Everything in Thornton's training rebelled against it. But the alternative was worse, allowing the conspiracy to continue, letting more operators die in future ambushes because he'd been too cautious to act. I'll need your help, Thornton said. Intelligence support, maybe boots on the ground if things go sideways. You'll have it, the voice replied. I'll be in Yemen before your forces arrive. When the ambush comes, they won't be facing it alone. How will I contact you once we're operational? You won't need to, General. I'll be watching. When your people need me, I'll be there. The voice paused. One more thing. The briefing tomorrow morning. There's going to be someone in that room feeding information to Titan. Watch carefully. Look for who asks questions about force composition, insertion methods, and timing. That's your mole. The call ended, leaving Thornton alone with his thoughts and the weight of what he'd just set in motion. He looked at the intelligence package on his screen, at the details of an operation that would either expose a massive conspiracy or get good men killed trying. Outside his window, the rain had stopped. The Pentagon's lights reflected off wet pavement, creating patterns that shifted with every passing vehicle. Somewhere out there, a dead man was preparing to hunt again. And tomorrow morning, Thornton would sit in a briefing room with a traitor and pretend he didn't know the mission was compromised. He pulled out his personal notebook and began writing down everything he'd learned, everything he suspected. If this went wrong, if the conspiracy was deeper than even Reaper 6 knew, someone would need to know the truth. He sealed the notebook in an envelope, addressed it to Colonel Sarah Chen with instructions to open it only if something happened to him. Then General Marcus Thornton, 3-star general with 28 years of service, sat back in his chair and waited for morning. He'd crossed a line tonight, stepped into a shadow world where the rules he'd lived by no longer applied. But he'd done it to protect his soldiers, to stop a conspiracy that was killing American operators for profit. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring the briefing, the planning, the preparation for an operation that both sides knew was a trap. Tomorrow would reveal who, in the highest levels of SOCOM, was selling out their own people. And somewhere in the darkness, Reaper 6 was already moving, a ghost returning to the battlefield one more time. The hunt had begun again. The SOCOM briefing room at 0800 hours was exactly what you'd expect from a 4-star command. Polished mahogany table, secure communications equipment, walls lined with screens displaying real-time intelligence feeds from conflict zones around the world. 11 people sat around the table, each one holding clearances that made congressional oversight committees nervous. General Thornton arrived early, positioning himself where he could observe everyone as they entered. He'd spent the night reviewing personnel files, looking for connections to Titan Defense Solutions or unusual financial activity. What he'd found hadn't made him feel better. General William Bradford entered first, his 4 stars gleaming even in the fluorescent light. He was followed by his J2, Colonel Sarah Chen, carrying a thick briefing book. Then came the J3 operations officer, the J5 strategic plans director, and several other staff officers whose faces Thornton knew but whose loyalties he was now questioning. The Titan Defense Solutions representative arrived at 0755. His name was David Kellerman, former Delta operator, current senior intelligence analyst for the contractor. He wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than a captain's monthly salary and carried himself with the confidence of someone who knew he was untouchable. Thornton watched Kellerman carefully as he set up his presentation materials. The man moved efficiently, professionally, but there was something in his eyes when he glanced around the room. Assessment, calculation, the look of someone measuring threats and opportunities. "Gentlemen, let's get started," Bradford said, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Mr. Kellerman, you have the floor." Kellerman activated the main display showing a satellite image of a compound in southern Yemen. Thank you, General. What you're looking at is the confirmed location of Ibrahim al-Sayed, high-value target with connections to Iranian intelligence and multiple terrorist organizations. Our asset has provided detailed intelligence on his location, security disposition, and daily routine. Thornton studied the imagery carefully. The compound looked real enough, showing signs of recent activity and security measures consistent with a high-value target. But he knew from Reaper 6 that al-Sayed was already dead, so who was really in that compound? Our asset indicates al-Sayed will be at this location for the next 48 hours, Kellerman continued. After that, he's scheduled to move to a new location that will be significantly harder to access. The window for action is narrow. Colonel Chen leaned forward. What's the confidence level on this intelligence? 90%, Kellerman replied without hesitation. Our asset has been inside al-Sayed's network for 18 months. He's provided actionable intelligence on 12 previous operations, 10 of which were successful. And the 2 that weren't? Thornton asked quietly. Kellerman's eyes flicked to him briefly. One was compromised by local forces who tipped off the target. The other involved a target who changed his pattern unexpectedly. Neither failure was due to our asset's intelligence being inaccurate. It was a smooth answer, well-rehearsed, but Thornton noticed Kellerman's left hand had moved to touch his watch, a classic self-soothing gesture that suggested stress. The man was lying, or at least uncomfortable with the question. Walk us through the proposed operation, Bradford ordered. For the next 20 minutes, Kellerman laid out a detailed plan. A 12-man team from SEAL Team 6 would insert via helicopter at night, hit the compound, capture or kill al-Sayed, and extract with minimal footprint. Fast, clean, professional. The kind of operation JSOC had executed hundreds of times, except this time, Thornton knew, the enemy would be waiting. Questions? Bradford asked when Kellerman finished. The J3 operations officer spoke up. What's the enemy force composition in the area? QRF capabilities, response times? Kellerman pulled up another slide showing militia positions and government forces. Minimal threat. The nearest significant force is 40 kilometers away with limited mobility. By the time they could respond, our team would be wheels up and gone. Thornton watched the others around the table. Most were nodding, accepting the assessment. But Colonel Chen was frowning slightly, her analyst mind clearly working through the details. Mr. Kellerman, Chen said carefully, this intelligence seems remarkably complete. GPS coordinates accurate to 3 meters, guard rotation schedules down to the minute, even the interior layout of buildings. How does your asset have access to this level of detail? There it was, the question that needed asking. Kellerman's expression remained professional, but Thornton saw his jaw tighten slightly. Our asset is part of al-Sayed's security detail, Kellerman explained. He's been feeding us information for over a year, building his position and access. This is the culmination of a long-term penetration operation. And he's willing to risk exposure for this operation, Chen pressed. If al-Sayed is killed or captured, your asset's cover will be blown. He understands the risks, Kellerman said. He's been adequately compensated and will be exfiltrated along with our forces. Thornton made a mental note. The asset would conveniently disappear after the operation, making it impossible to verify his intelligence or question him about the ambush. Very convenient. General Thornton, Bradford said, you've been quiet. Thoughts? This was the moment. Thornton could either voice his suspicions now, potentially tipping off the conspirators, or play along and spring the trap on his own terms. He thought about Reaper 6's advice and made his choice. I think we should proceed, Thornton said evenly, but with modifications to the operational plan. Reduce the assault force to 8 operators instead of 12. Use a different insertion method, maybe hey-ho jump instead of helicopter. And position a quick reaction force closer than standard doctrine would suggest. Bradford frowned. Why the changes? The plan Kellerman outlined is solid. Because Yemen is unpredictable, sir, Thornton replied. We've had operations go sideways there before. I'd rather have redundancy and flexibility built in from the start. He watched Kellerman's reaction carefully. The contractor's expression remained neutral, but his hand went to his watch again, and his eyes flicked to someone else at the table. A brief glance that lasted less than a second, but told Thornton everything he needed to know. The person Kellerman had looked at was Colonel Raymond Foster, the J5 Strategic Plans Director. A man with 26 years of service, 3 combat tours, and a reputation for brilliant operational planning. A man Thornton had trusted completely until that one revealing glance. "I agree with General Thornton," Chen said suddenly. "The intelligence is almost too good. That makes me nervous. Adding redundancy and contingency planning is just good practice." Bradford considered for a moment, then nodded. "All right, General Thornton, you'll oversee the modifications to the operational plan. Coordinate with the SEAL Team 6 commander and make whatever changes you think are necessary. But I want this operation executed within 48 hours. We can't let this window close." "Understood, sir," Thornton replied. The briefing continued for another hour, covering logistics, communications, and contingency plans. Through it all, Thornton watched Colonel Foster. The man participated normally, asked appropriate questions, and showed no outward signs of guilt. But twice more, Thornton caught brief eye contact between Foster and Kellerman, subtle communications that confirmed his suspicions. When the briefing ended, people filed out in small groups. Thornton hung back, pretending to review notes on his tablet. Colonel Foster was one of the last to leave, stopping briefly to speak with Kellerman near the door. "The changes concern you?" Foster asked quietly, his voice barely audible. "Modifications are normal," Kellerman replied, his tone casual but his body language tense. "We adjust and proceed." "What if Thornton suspects something?" "He's a staff officer who got promoted above his competence level," Kellerman said dismissively. "He's just being cautious. Nothing we can't handle." They separated, neither noticing that Thornton had positioned his tablet to record their conversation using its passive audio collection feature. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Thornton left the briefing room and headed directly to the secure communications facility 3 floors down. He entered an isolated booth designed for the most sensitive conversations and pulled out his secure cell phone. The call was answered on the first ring. "I know who the mole is," Thornton said without preamble. "Colonel Raymond Foster, J5 at SOCOM. 26 years of service, decorated combat veteran, and apparently selling out his own people to Titan Defense Solutions." "Foster," Reaper 6's voice was thoughtful. "I know that name. He was on the planning staff for the original Yemen operation 12 years ago. He's one of the ones who got away." Thornton felt his stomach drop. "You're telling me he's been compromised for over a decade?" "At least, probably longer. Morrison's network recruited carefully, targeting officers who had access but wouldn't be obvious suspects. Foster fits the profile perfectly. Competent enough to be trusted with sensitive operations, ambitious enough to want more than his salary provided, and positioned to do maximum damage." "I recorded a conversation between him and Kellerman," Thornton said, "nothing explicitly incriminating, but it establishes a relationship that shouldn't exist between a SOCOM staff officer and a defense contractor. It's a start, but we need more. We need evidence that will stand up in a court-martial and implicate everyone involved in the network. That means catching them in the act." "The Yemen operation," Thornton said. "Exactly. Foster will communicate the operational changes to whoever is setting up the ambush. If we can intercept those communications, document them, and tie them directly to him, we'll have everything we need." "How do we intercept his communications?" Thornton asked. "He's too smart to use official channels for something like this." "He'll use a cutout, probably a burner phone or encrypted messaging app. But every communication leaves traces. I have people who can track those traces, given time and access." There was a pause. "I need you to get me inside SOCOM, full access, even if it's just for a few hours." "That's impossible," Thornton protested. "Security protocols can be bypassed if you're willing to bend some rules, General. You're a 3-star with oversight authority. You can authorize a security consultant to conduct a counterintelligence assessment of your own communications systems. I'll come in as that consultant." It was brazen, bringing a supposed dead man into one of the most secure facilities in the military. But Thornton was already deep into bending rules. What was one more? "I'll arrange it for tomorrow morning," Thornton said, "but you'll need credentials, documentation, already handled. Check your classified email in 30 minutes. You'll find a complete package for a consultant named James Reed, former NSA, current private sector specialist in communication security. Everything will check out if anyone bothers to verify." The call ended, leaving Thornton wondering how deep Reaper 6's network actually went. The man had been supposedly dead for 12 years, yet he could create false identities that would pass Pentagon security screening. The resources required for that were staggering. Thornton returned to his office and found Captain Morrison waiting with more reports to review. He worked through them mechanically, his mind elsewhere, planning for tomorrow. At 1500 hours, he received a secure email from SEAL Team 6's commander asking to discuss the operational modifications. The SEAL commander, Captain Mike Randall, was a 20-year veteran with more combat deployments than Thornton could count. He listened carefully as Thornton explained the changes, his weathered face showing concern. General, with respect, these modifications change the entire character of the operation. Reducing team size, altering insertion methods, positioning a QRF closer than normal. It's like you're expecting heavy contact. I am, Thornton said quietly. He made a decision then, trusting his instincts about Randall's character. Mike, I'm going to read you in on something, but before I do, I need your word that this stays between us unless I say otherwise. Randall's expression became guarded. Sir, if you're about to tell me something that compromises operational security... I'm about to tell you something that might save your men's lives, Thornton interrupted. The Yemen intelligence is compromised. I have reason to believe the operation is a setup designed to ambush your team. The SEAL commander went very still. That's a serious accusation, General. What's your source? Someone who's been tracking this conspiracy for 12 years. Someone who warned me about this exact scenario before the operation was even briefed. Does General Bradford know? Not yet. If I'm wrong, I'll destroy my career and credibility for nothing. But if I'm right and we don't prepare for an ambush, your men will die. Randall studied him for a long moment. Sir, you're asking me to trust your judgment over official intelligence channels. That's a big ask. I know, but ask yourself this, Mike. Have you ever seen intelligence this complete, this detailed, on a target this significant? Doesn't it feel too perfect? The SEAL commander was quiet, clearly wrestling with the decision. Finally, he nodded. It does feel too good. I've been in this business long enough to know that perfect intelligence is usually too perfect. All right, General, I'll plan for heavy contact, position my men accordingly, and make sure we have robust extraction contingencies. But if this goes sideways and you're wrong, then I'll take full responsibility, Thornton said. Your career will be protected. You were following orders from a general officer. After Randall left, Thornton spent the rest of the day coordinating logistics for the operation. He positioned a Marine Quick Reaction Force at a forward operating base in Djibouti, close enough to respond to Yemen within 30 minutes. He arranged for additional ISR assets, surveillance drones that would provide real-time coverage of the operation. And he quietly placed a AC-130 gunship on standby, officially for a different mission, but available if needed. Each modification was justified through standard operational planning. Nothing that would raise red flags, but together, they created a response capability far beyond what a normal direct action mission would require. Thornton was preparing for war, not a raid. That evening, he received a text message on his secure phone. Package delivered, check your email. The email contained credentials for James Reed, complete with background, security clearances, and a schedule showing he was contracted to conduct a counterintelligence assessment of SOCOM communication systems. The documentation was perfect, the kind of quality that usually took weeks to produce. Thornton approved the contract with a digital signature and forwarded it to the security office. James Reed would have full access to SOCOM facilities starting at 0700 the next morning. At midnight, Thornton was still in his office when his secure phone rang. It was Colonel Sarah Chen. Marcus, I've been digging into the Yemen intelligence like you suggested, she said without preamble. Something's not right. I contacted CIA to verify the asset's reporting history, and they have no record of this source. More concerning, I reached out to an old contact in Langley who works the Yemen portfolio. He told me, off the record, that Ibrahim al-Sayed was killed 3 months ago in a drone strike. Operation Sandstorm, Thornton said quietly. There was a pause. How did you know that designation? It's compartmented above our clearance level. I have a source, Thornton replied. Sarah, the Yemen operation is a trap. The intelligence is fabricated to lure our forces into an ambush. And I believe Colonel Foster is feeding operational details to the people setting up that ambush. Raymond Foster? Chen's voice was shocked. Marcus, that's treason, I know. But I need proof before I can take this to General Bradford. That's why I need your help tomorrow. James Reed, the security consultant, is going to be conducting communications assessments. I need you to make sure he has access to Foster's communications logs, particularly anything from the past 48 hours. You're asking me to spy on a fellow officer based on a suspicion. I'm asking you to help me prove or disprove that suspicion before more operators die, Thornton corrected. If I'm wrong, we document Foster's innocence and move on. If I'm right, we stop a traitor before he can do more damage. Chen was quiet for a long moment. All right, but Marcus, if this blows up, we're both finished. Better finished than living with more dead operators on our conscience. The next morning, James Reed arrived at SOCOM at precisely 0700 hours. Thornton met him at the security checkpoint, seeing Reaper 6 in person for only the second time. The man looked different in a suit, older, more professional, but the eyes were the same, constantly assessing, evaluating threats. Mr. Reed, Thornton said formally, thank you for coming on such short notice. Happy to help, General, Reed replied in a voice slightly different from his taxi driver persona. He'd altered his accent, his cadence, even the way he held himself. It was a masterful performance. They walked through the facility, Thornton providing a tour while explaining the assessment requirements. To anyone watching, it was a routine contractor visit. But as they passed through different sections, Reed was absorbing everything, his trained eye noting security measures, communication protocols, and vulnerabilities. Colonel Chen met them in the communications center. Mr. Reed, General Thornton says you'll need access to our classified networks for your assessment. Just read-only access, Colonel, Reed replied smoothly. I need to understand your communications architecture, identify potential vulnerabilities, and recommend improvements. Standard procedure for this type of assessment. Chen provided credentials that gave Reed access to system logs and communications metadata. Not the actual content of classified messages, but enough to see who was communicating with whom, when, and through what methods. Reed settled at a terminal, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Thornton and Chen stood nearby, watching screens that showed network traffic patterns and communication logs. Interesting, Reed murmured after 15 minutes. Colonel, you have an anomaly here. One of your users has been accessing external networks through a VPN tunnel that's not part of your official infrastructure. The traffic is encrypted, routed through multiple proxy servers, and designed to avoid your monitoring systems. Chen leaned in, studying the data. Who? Reed pulled up the user credentials. Colonel Raymond Foster, J5 Directorate. Thornton felt a grim satisfaction. Can you trace where those communications are going? Already am, Reed replied. His fingers flew across the keyboard, executing commands that Thornton didn't fully understand but recognized as sophisticated hacking techniques. The final destination is a server in the Cayman Islands, registered to a shell company that's owned by another shell company, but if I follow the money trail, he pulled up financial records that should have been completely inaccessible. The ultimate owner is Titan Defense Solutions. And look at this. Foster's been communicating with this server every time a special operations mission has been briefed. He's literally sending operational details directly to the people planning ambushes. That's all the evidence we need, Chen said, reaching for her phone. I'm calling General Bradford. Wait, Reed interrupted. If you arrest Foster now, the network will shut down. You'll get one traitor but lose the opportunity to identify everyone involved. Better to let him communicate the changes to the Yemen operation, track who receives that information, and roll up the entire conspiracy at once. That means proceeding with an operation we know is compromised, Thornton said. Yes, but now you're prepared. Your forces expect heavy contact. You have assets positioned for rapid response, and I'll be in Yemen before your team arrives, providing overwatch and intelligence. You're going to Yemen? Chen asked, studying Reed carefully. Who exactly are you, Mr. Reed? Reed smiled slightly. Someone who takes treason personally, Colonel. Someone who's been hunting these people for a very long time. Chen looked at Thornton. Marcus, what have you gotten us into? Something necessary, Thornton replied. Something that should have been done 12 years ago. They spent the next 2 hours documenting Foster's communications, creating an evidence package that would support court-martial charges. Reed also installed monitoring software that would track any new communications, ensuring they had real-time visibility into Foster's activities. At 1100 hours, Foster sent an encrypted message through his covert channel. Reed intercepted it, breaking the encryption in less than 5 minutes. "He's reporting the operational modifications," Reed said, reading the decoded message. 8-man team, hey-ho insertion, increased QRF positioning. He's also adding a note that General Thornton may be suspicious and recommending they abort if there are any further changes. "Will they abort?" Chen asked. "No," Reed replied confidently. "They've invested too much in this operation. They'll adapt their ambush to account for the smaller team and altered insertion method, which means we'll have proof of their complicity when they're waiting at the new landing zone instead of the old one." "Unless they kill our people," Thornton said grimly. "They won't. I'll make sure of that." Reed stood, logging out of the terminal and carefully wiping his access. "General, the rest is up to you. Proceed with the operation as planned. I'll be in position in Yemen within 24 hours. When the ambush comes, I'll make sure your SEALs aren't alone." "How do I contact you once you're in country?" Thornton asked. Reed handed him a small device that looked like a thumb drive. "This is a secure communication beacon. When your team is 30 minutes from target, activate it by pressing the button 3 times. I'll receive the signal and know you're committed. If the situation becomes critical, press the button 5 times rapidly. That's a distress signal." "What happens when I send that distress signal?" "I bring in assets that will turn the battlefield in your favor," Reed replied cryptically. "Trust me, General, I've been planning for this moment for 12 years. Your men will come home." Reed left the building as smoothly as he'd entered, just another contractor completing another assessment. But Thornton knew the ghost was already in motion, traveling to Yemen through channels that didn't appear in any manifest or travel record. That afternoon, Thornton briefed General Bradford on the operational status, carefully omitting any mention of Foster's treason or Reaper 6's involvement. Bradford approved the plan, confident that JSOC was about to score a significant victory against a high-value target. Colonel Foster attended the briefing, taking notes and asking questions about timeline and force disposition. He showed no sign of knowing his communications had been compromised or that his career was hours away from ending in disgrace and imprisonment. Thornton watched him carefully, this man who'd worn the uniform for over 2 decades while betraying everything it stood for. Foster had sent men to their deaths for money, had corrupted his oath, had become the enemy he'd sworn to fight, and tomorrow he would face the consequences. The SEAL team deployed that evening, flying to a forward staging base in Djibouti. From there, they would launch the final insertion into Yemen. Thornton watched the aircraft disappear into the darkness, carrying 8 of America's most elite operators toward a trap that had been carefully prepared. But this time, the trap was mutual. At midnight, Thornton's secure phone received a brief text message, "In position, game on." Reaper 6 was in Yemen. The operation launched at 200 hours local time. 8 SEALs performed a high-altitude, high-opening parachute jump from a C-130, flying in silent and invisible toward the compound where Ibrahim al-Sayed supposedly waited. Thornton watched from the operations center at SOCOM, screens showing feeds from multiple ISR assets overhead. Captain Randall's voice came through clearly. "Reaper TOC, this is Reaper 1. Team is 5 minutes from landing zone. Area appears quiet." "Copy that, Reaper 1, Thornton replied, using the Tactical Operations Center call sign. "Be advised, we're picking up heat signatures in the surrounding buildings, multiple individuals, possibly civilians." "Or enemy forces," Randall replied. "Reaper 1 adjusting approach vector, landing 300 meters north of planned LZ." The modification was smart, keeping the team away from potential ambush positions. But Thornton knew the enemy would have multiple positions prepared. They'd been planning this for weeks, maybe longer. The SEALs landed silently, regrouped, and began moving toward the target compound. Thermal imagery showed them advancing in tactical formation, weapons ready, every movement professional and controlled. "Reaper 1, this is Reaper TOC, Thornton said carefully. "We're seeing movement in buildings 400 meters east of your position. Recommend you hold position and assess." Reaper 1 copies, taking covered positions and observing. For 5 minutes, nothing happened. The SEALs waited in shadows, watching the compound and surrounding area. Thermal imagery showed more heat signatures gathering in nearby buildings, a pattern that suggested coordination rather than random civilian movement. Then the radio crackled with a new voice, encrypted on a frequency that shouldn't exist. "Reaper TOC, this is Overwatch. I count 47 hostiles in ambush positions surrounding the compound. Enemy commander is in Building 6. Coordinates on your screen now. This is a trap. Thornton recognized the voice. Reaper 6. General Bradford, monitoring the operation from beside Thornton, keyed his microphone. Overwatch, identify yourself. You're on a classified frequency. General Bradford, this is a voice from your past. Task Force 121, Yemen, 12 years ago. You were told we all died. You were lied to. And the people who lied to you are about to spring another ambush on your forces. Bradford's face went white. That's impossible. Reaper 6 died in that operation. Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated, sir. Now listen carefully. The intelligence for this operation came from Titan Defense Solutions, the same organization that set up the original ambush. They know your team is here because Colonel Raymond Foster told them about every operational modification. Your SEALs are about to be hit by a force 5 times their size unless you act now. Bradford looked at Thornton. Did you know about this? Yes, sir, Thornton replied. I've been investigating Titan and Colonel Foster for the past 72 hours. The evidence of treason is conclusive. This operation was a trap from the beginning, designed to kill our operators and blame it on bad luck. Why didn't you tell me? Bradford demanded. Because I didn't know who else might be compromised, sir. Foster has been passing information for over a decade. He's had time to build relationships, to identify allies within SOCOM. I couldn't risk the investigation being shut down before we had conclusive proof. Bradford's jaw clenched. We'll discuss this later. Right now, we have 8 operators in a kill zone. He keyed his microphone. Reaper 1, this is TOC. Mission is compromised. Extract immediately. QRF is launching now. But before Randall could respond, the night erupted in fire. Muzzle flashes blossomed from a dozen positions as the enemy opened fire on the SEAL team. Tracer rounds cut through the darkness like angry red lines, converging on where the SEALs had taken cover. Reaper 1 taking heavy fire. Randall's voice was calm despite the chaos. Multiple enemy positions were pinned down. Overwatch engaging. Reaper 6's voice cut through the radio chatter. On the thermal imagery, Thornton saw new heat signatures appear. Suppressed rifle fire, taking down enemy fighters with precision that suggested night vision and superior positioning. Reaper 1, move west. I've cleared a corridor for you. The SEALs moved, flowing through the darkness with practiced efficiency while Reaper 6 provided covering fire. But there were too many enemy fighters, and they were closing in from multiple directions. TOC, this is Reaper 1. We need air support now. Thornton had been waiting for this moment. He activated the AC-130 gunship that had been orbiting 50 miles away, officially supporting a different operation. Hammer 2-1, this is Reaper TOC. You are cleared hot on designated targets. Danger close to friendly forces. Hammer 2-1 copies. Beginning gun run. The gunship's 105mm cannon spoke, its rounds impacting with devastating accuracy among the enemy positions. Entire buildings disintegrated under the barrage, enemy fighters disappearing in explosions of concrete and flame. But the enemy had prepared for air support, shoulder-fired. Anti-aircraft missiles streaked up from concealed positions, forcing the gunship to break off its attack run. Hammer 2-1 is taking fire. We're hit, losing altitude, going to make emergency landing at friendly base. The SEALs were on their own again, fighting through an enemy force that showed no sign of retreating. Thermal imagery showed casualties on both sides, but the numbers were against the Americans. Reaper TOC, this is Overwatch. I need you to activate that distress beacon I gave you. 5 rapid presses. Do it now. Thornton pulled out the device Reed had given him, pressing the button 5 times as instructed. Done. What happens now? Now the enemy learns that they're not the only ones who prepared an ambush. For 30 seconds, nothing changed. The firefight continued, the SEALs trading fire with an enemy that had them surrounded and outnumbered. Then the horizon lit up with explosions. Secondary ambush positions that the enemy thought were secure erupted in flames. Buildings collapsed. Vehicle-mounted weapons exploded. The coordinated enemy attack dissolved into chaos as their command and control infrastructure was systematically destroyed. What the hell was that? Bradford demanded. Insurance, sir, Thornton replied, watching the thermal imagery show enemy fighters breaking and running. Reaper 6 didn't come to Yemen alone. He brought a team. What team? We don't have any other assets in Yemen. We do now, sir. Or rather, we never stopped having them. Task Force 121 didn't die 12 years ago. It went dark, and it's been hunting traitors ever since. The enemy's retreat turned into a rout as more explosions ripped through their positions. The SEALs, taking advantage of the chaos, moved toward their extraction point with Reaper 6 providing overwatch. Reaper 1, this is TOC, extract to landing zone Bravo. Marine QRF will meet you there in 10 minutes. Copy that, TOC, moving now. The extraction was textbook perfect. The SEALs reached the landing zone, secured it against minimal resistance, and were picked up by Marine helicopters exactly on schedule. None of them had suffered serious injuries, though several had close calls. As the helicopters disappeared toward safety, Thornton watched the thermal imagery of the battlefield. Enemy casualties were severe, at least 30 dead and more wounded. But more importantly, several enemy fighters had been captured by unseen forces, their heat signatures showing them being bound and secured. Overwatch, this is TOC. Status? Mission accomplished, TOC. The enemy commander and 3 of his lieutenants are secured. They'll be very interested in discussing who paid them to ambush American forces. I'll deliver them to friendly forces within 24 hours, along with extensive documentation of the conspiracy. What about you? Thornton asked. Are you coming back? There was a long pause. My work isn't finished yet, General. There are still people in Washington who need to answer for what they've done. But first, I suggest you secure Colonel Foster before he realizes his operation failed and tries to run. Thornton looked at Bradford. Sir, with your permission? Bradford's face was hard as granite. Do it. And Marcus, when this is over, you and I are going to have a very long conversation about operational security and chain of command. Yes, sir. Looking forward to it. Military police arrested Colonel Raymond Foster in his home at 0430 hours. They found him preparing to leave the country, documents and cash packed for a hasty departure. A search of his house revealed encrypted communications equipment, offshore bank account information showing millions in deposits, and a detailed list of operations he'd compromised over the past decade. The evidence was damning. Foster broke during his initial interrogation, providing names of other conspirators in exchange for a life sentence instead of execution. The conspiracy reached further than Thornton had imagined, involving 3 other field-grade officers, 2 senior Pentagon civilians, and multiple contractor personnel. But the biggest name Foster provided was David Kellerman, the Titan Defense Solutions analyst. Kellerman was arrested while attempting to board a private jet to a non-extradition country. He, too, broke under interrogation, revealing the full scope of Titan's operations. The company had been systematically compromising special operations for over a decade, setting up ambushes that killed American operators in order to create demand for private military solutions. Each failure made the case for privatization stronger. Each casualty increased pressure on conventional forces to rely more on contractors. It was a business model built on betrayal and murder. The congressional hearings that followed were brutal. General Bradford testified for 2 days, explaining how his command had been penetrated by a conspiracy that reached back more than a decade. Thornton testified for 3 days, laying out the evidence and explaining his decision to work with an unsanctioned asset to expose the conspiracy. Some senators praised him as a hero. Others called for his court-martial for operating outside proper channels. The debate raged for weeks, but Thornton didn't particularly care about the political fallout. He cared that the conspiracy had been broken, that no more operators would die because someone wanted a bigger contract or a cushy retirement position. 2 months after the Yemen operation, Thornton was called to a private meeting at the White House. He expected to be relieved of command, possibly prosecuted for his actions. Instead, he found himself in the Oval Office with the President and the Secretary of Defense. General Thornton, the President said, what you did was completely inappropriate, totally outside proper channels, and absolutely necessary. You saved lives and exposed corruption at a level that could have destroyed our special operations capability. Thank you, Mr. President, Thornton replied, unsure where this was going. The President picked up something from his desk. It was a small box, the kind that held military decorations. The Secretary of Defense has recommended you for the Distinguished Service Medal. I'm upgrading that recommendation to the Defense Distinguished Service Medal. But that's not why I asked you here. He set the box down and looked directly at Thornton. I'm nominating you for Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Bradford will be retiring next month, and we need someone who understands that protecting our people comes before protecting careers or reputations. Someone who will ask hard questions and won't accept easy answers. Thornton was stunned. Sir, I violated protocols, worked with an unsanctioned asset, operated outside my chain of command. You did what was necessary when the system failed, the president interrupted. That's exactly the kind of judgment we need at the highest levels. Will you accept the nomination? Thornton thought about the 8 SEALs who'd come home safe because he'd been willing to trust a ghost. He thought about the 14 men who died 12 years ago because no one had asked the right questions. He thought about the responsibility that came with wearing 4 stars. Yes, Mr. President, I'll accept. After the meeting, Thornton walked out of the White House into a bright Washington afternoon. His secure phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Congratulations, Chairman. The position suits you. When you find the next conspiracy, and you will, you know how to reach me. The hunt continues. R.S. Thornton smiled slightly, pocketing the phone. Somewhere out there, Reaper 6 was still hunting, still protecting operators from the shadows, still being the ghost that traitors feared. 3 weeks later, Thornton was walking through Reagan National Airport when he saw a familiar yellow cab at the taxi stand. On impulse, he walked over and got in. Pentagon, he said. The driver turned, and Thornton found himself looking at those same watchful eyes. Welcome back, General, Reaper 6 said with a slight smile. Or should I say, Mr. Chairman? The Senate still has to confirm me, Thornton replied. They will. You're exactly what this country needs right now. The cab pulled into traffic, moving smoothly through the afternoon rush. So how does it feel, knowing you're about to be responsible for the entire military establishment? Terrifying, Thornton admitted, but necessary. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes before Reaper 6 spoke again. You did good work in Yemen, General. Saved 8 lives, exposed a conspiracy, and sent a message that betrayal won't be tolerated. That's a win by any measure. We couldn't have done it without you, Thornton said, which raises a question. What happens to you now? The conspiracy is broken, the traitors are in prison. Are you finally going to come in from the cold? Reaper 6 chuckled. The conspiracy we broke was one branch of a larger tree, General. Titan is gone, but there are other contractors, other networks, other people willing to profit from soldiers' deaths. My work isn't finished. So you'll keep driving a cab and hunting traitors? Something like that, though I might upgrade to an Uber account. The humor faded from his voice. Someone has to stand watch, General. Someone has to be willing to cross the lines that good men like you can't cross. That's my role now. That's my penance for surviving when my men didn't. It wasn't your fault they died, Thornton said quietly. No, but it's my responsibility that their deaths meant something, that the people who killed them face justice, that future operators don't die the same way. Reaper 6 met his eyes in the mirror. You'll understand that better once you're chairman. The weight of every decision, every life, it never gets easier. They arrived at the Pentagon. Thornton paid the fare. This time Reaper 6 accepted it and stepped out into the late afternoon sun. One more thing, Reaper 6 said through the window. Foster gave up names, but not all of them. There are still people in the system who are part of the conspiracy. They're lying low now, waiting for attention to fade. When they surface again, when they start rebuilding their networks, I'll call, Thornton promised. I know you will. That's why I gave you that number. Reaper 6 smiled. Take care of our people, Chairman. They deserve leaders who put them first. I will. And you, Thornton paused. Stay safe out there, whatever you're doing. Safety is overrated, General. Justice matters more. The cab pulled away, disappearing into traffic. Thornton watched it go, knowing he'd probably see that yellow taxi again someday. When another conspiracy emerged, when another operation smelled wrong, when good men were being sent to die for someone else's profit. He walked into the Pentagon, past the security checkpoints he'd passed through thousands of times. But this time felt different. This time he carried the weight of 4 stars not yet awarded, the responsibility of an entire military establishment, and the knowledge that sometimes protecting people meant working with ghosts. His aide was waiting with the daily briefing books. Captain Morrison looked concerned. Sir, there's a report from Afghanistan. Special Forces operation went sideways, 3 casualties. The intelligence came from a new contractor, Aegis Strategic Solutions. They're saying it was bad luck, wrong place at wrong time. Thornton took the report, studying it carefully. The details were troubling. Perfect intelligence that turned out to be perfectly wrong, a target that escaped just before the raid, casualties that seemed disproportionate. The pattern was familiar, too familiar. He pulled out his phone, looking at the contact information for that unlisted number. Not yet. He needed more information, more evidence. But he filed the name away. Aegis Strategic Solutions, another contractor with another operation that had gone wrong. The hunt, it seemed, was never truly over. 6 months later, General Marcus Thornton was confirmed as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in a unanimous Senate vote. His first act was to implement new oversight procedures for contractor intelligence, requiring multiple independent verifications before operations could be launched. His second act was to create a small, classified unit tasked with investigating suspicious patterns in special operations failures. The unit operated outside normal channels, reported directly to a mesas, and had authority to pursue investigations wherever they led. He never told anyone, but he modeled the unit after what he imagined Task Force 121 had become. Ghosts hunting ghosts, operators protecting operators, working in shadows to keep the light safe. And sometimes, late at night, his secure phone would buzz with intelligence from an unknown source. Details about contractors, suspicious financial transactions, or operations that smelled wrong. The information was always accurate, always actionable, and always unsigned. But Thornton knew who sent it. Somewhere in the darkness, Reaper 6 was still watching, still hunting, still keeping faith with the men who died 12 years ago in Yemen. The taxi driver had become a guardian angel, and the 3-star general who'd mocked a call sign had become the chairman who understood that sometimes the best defenders worked in shadows. Justice, Thornton learned, wasn't always served in courtrooms or congressional hearings. Sometimes it was served in darkness, by ghosts who refused to let betrayal go unanswered. And he was grateful those ghosts were on America's side. The story that began with a joke about call signs in a rainy taxi had ended with understanding and respect. The general had learned that the most dangerous warriors weren't always the ones in uniform, and the taxi driver had found an ally in the halls of power. Together they would continue hunting the conspiracies that threatened those who served. Together they would ensure that no more operators died because someone wanted profit over honor. The hunt would never truly end. But now, at least, the hunters had backup. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., a yellow cab continued its routes, its driver watching, waiting, ready to answer the call when justice demanded action. Because that's what Reaper 6 did. He hunted.